my last video, historically speaking, being seen and accepted as white in America has come with privileges both social and legal. All immigrant groups had the pressure to assimilate into dominant culture, but European immigrants looked the most like British colonizers. So it was easier for them to lose their accents, their culture, and their language in order to assimilate into a white ethnic label. But what about people who weren't European or didn't have light features? Remember that one of the main benefits of being seen legally as white was a legally defensible claim to land and property. When Chinese immigrants came to the West, they were met with a lot of racism from white citizens because they were seen as competition in the railroad and mining industries. As a result, Oregon's constitution in 1859 stated that no Chinaman can own property in Oregon. It went on to protect the rights of white foreigners and gave European immigrants the same right to property as American nationals. Anti-Chinese sentiment spread in the West, and the Washington Territory passed legislation in 1886 that not only prohibited them from owning property, but also from becoming citizens. The United States Naturalization Law was passed in 1790, and it stated that naturalization would be granted to free white persons of good moral character. This of course excluded people of color, indentured servants, and slaves. Well, these laws were changed with the Naturalization Act of 1870. While the change in law was great for freed slaves, it excluded anyone who wasn't white or black. California adjusted their constitution in 1879 to reflect the language of the new naturalization law and forbade everyone who wasn't white or black from owning property. By 1913, anti-Japanese sentiments in California had intensified. The Chinese Exclusion Act passed in 1882, and this stopped immigration from China to America. As a result, labor recruiters started to turn to Japan. The Asiatic Exclusion League formed in the early 20th century and fought to keep Asian immigrants from coming to America. They formed 67 labor unions and sought to keep these industries white. The Alien Land Law was passed in 1913 in California, and it prevented non-citizens from owning land. While this law prevented Japanese people from owning land, it didn't prevent their American-born children from owning land in their names. So often land was purchased in the name of a child, but this was a loophole that was closed when the law was adjusted in 1923. Takeo Ozawa was a Japanese immigrant who came to San Francisco in 1894. He was an educated man having 3 years of education from the University of California. He spoke fluent English, he was married, a practicing Christian, and had a family that was fully assimilated into American culture. He filed a petition for naturalization on August 1st, 1902, and met all of the requirements for naturalization, except for one. He wasn't white, nor was he black. He lived in Hawaii for 5 years as required, but his petition to naturalize was rejected. Ozawa was not the kind of man to back down, so he took his case to the U.S. District Court of Hawaii, but of course it was disqualified again. Eventually, he took the case to the U.S. Supreme Court with the help of the Pacific Coast Japanese Association Deliberation Council. The council hired former U.S. Attorney General George W. Wickersham as Ozawa's counsel. There were many forces working against Ozawa's case, but what hurt him the most was Japan siding with the Allied powers in World War I. Because of Japan's clash with the U.S. over adding a racial equality clause, Japanese and American relations had become stressed. On top of the passing of the Alien Land Law in 1920, the U.S. Supreme Court feared that an unfavorable decision in the Ozawa case could reflect poorly on the United States' relationship with Japan. So the case was delayed till the fall of 1921. Ozawa would argue that he deserved to be legally included into the white race because, as he put it, his skin was as white, if not whiter, than the average white man. He famously said, "My honesty and my industriousness are known by my Japanese and American friends alike. In name, Benedict Arnold was an American, but in heart, he was a traitor. In name, I am not an American, but I am at heart." He presented that his religion, his education, and his character should be enough to categorize him as white and therefore eligible to be a citizen of the United States of America. But unfortunately, that wasn't enough, and Supreme Court Justice George Sutherland declared him racially ineligible for citizenship. He said that the color test alone would result in an overlapping of races and a gradual merge of one into the other with no practical line of separation. Furthermore, he stated that the word white referred exclusively to the Caucasian race. The Ozawa case would set a precedent that would set the tone for Japanese immigration to America, and it also made way for the Immigration Act of 1924. The Immigration Act of 1924 essentially sought to set quotas for all immigrant groups. The act was specifically created to limit European immigration to the United States. However, all immigrant groups were severely affected. The act banned all immigrants who were not legally eligible for citizenship, so as a result, immigrants from South and East Asia were banned from entering the country. The Immigration Act would go on to shape immigration law for the Japanese until the 1960s. Immigrants from all around the world were set with this unreasonable imposition to be seen as either white or black in this country. Since the label white is one that we've established as privilege in this country, many people of color went to court to argue that they were white enough to be seen as white in America. And the sad reality is that they often lost these cases or were denied trial. Anti-Japanese bias would just increase after this trial. And with the Second World War came the internment of the Japanese. The pressure of people of color to assimilate into whiteness has its roots in the historical limitations that have framed whiteness as the great and ultimate goal. Many people of color have to deal with deprogramming self-hatred that's bred by white supremacy in this country. I don't believe that Ozawa hated himself or his Japanese heritage. I believe that he was put into an unreasonable binary and went with the side that gave him the most. And that's white history. If you like this video, you can support my work by becoming a monthly Patreon patron.